It's official, ladies and gentlemen. After years and years and years of speculation and rumors and sources and thumbnails and theories and stories about Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau taking over Lucasfilm with MAGA hats on to make it based, George Lucas secretly working with people in Hollywood to have a hostile takeover of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy being fired more times than I can count. Here we are. It's official. Kathleen Kennedy is leaving Lucasfilm. Now, we obviously heard about this a few weeks ago with Dave Filoni and Lin-Wen Brennan taking over leadership duties. And there's been a lot of talk about that. And maybe 5 years ago, I think that the idea of Dave Filoni taking this over would have gone over far better than it will now. Maybe more than 5, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. But Lucasfilm and everyone involved in the leadership side of Lucasfilm has lost all trust from all fans in Star Wars. Now, I think that it's a very interesting time for Dave Filoni and Lin-Wen Brennan, who I'm not even overly familiar with, but I've heard she's basically another Kathleen Kennedy. I think it's a very interesting time for them to take over Lucasfilm, considering where we are. You have Mandalorian and Grogu set to be the first theatrical release from Lucasfilm since the disaster known as The Rise of Skywalker. I don't know how that movie's going to do. I've talked about it many times. I have no idea what it's going to do. My gut feeling is that it probably does okay, but it could easily flop just as easily as it could be $1 billion from my perspective, because I just truly don't know. If you would have brought the Mandalorian movie out after season 2, I think you're looking at a $1 billion film because there was so much momentum right then. But they have done so much to alienate the fan base and just make Star Wars irrelevant. If you go back to, I believe, around The Last Jedi, Bob Iger made statements that they were going to release a Star Wars movie every single year for their foreseeable future. That did not happen because the sequel trilogy was so damaging. Now, there has been some high points for Lucasfilm, but not many. And primarily that was seasons 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian. I know a lot of people liked Andor, but not a lot of people watched Andor. And you look at everything else they have going on, and it feels like Star Wars is on life support in many different ways. But here we go. Kathleen Kennedy is officially leaving Lucasfilm, confirming a recent rumor from Puck News. After 14 years overseeing Star Wars under Disney, Kennedy's exit marks the end of one of the most controversial leadership tenures in modern franchise history. While industry trades are framing the transition as a long-planned succession designed to recapture the studio's stride, the reality is far less flattering and more damaging. Absolutely it is. And we knew they were going to put this spin on it. We knew that. Kennedy is not stepping aside at the height of success. She is leaving behind a franchise that has shrunk in cultural relevance, fractured its fan base, and lost its standing as a true theatrical event. From event cinema to content mill. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, Star Wars was poised as an untouchable brand and a cinematic cornerstone meant to dominate box office, merchandising, and pop culture conversation for generations. That promise evaporated under Kennedy's leadership. Budgets ballooned while returns steadily declined. Production chaos became routine. High-profile creative hires were announced with fanfare only to quietly vanish months and years later. The once reliable theatrical pipeline collapsed entirely, resulting in a 7-year gap between Star Wars films and an unthinkable outcome of what was once Hollywood's most dependable blockbuster machine. By the time Kennedy announced her departure, Star Wars was no longer appointment viewing. It was no longer special. It was simply another Disney-owned IP fed into the streaming churn. 1,000% agreed with that. The cost of alienating an audience, perhaps the most enduring damage of the Kennedy era, is the collapse of fan trust. Instead of rebuilding goodwill after divisive releases, Lucasfilm repeatedly doubled down on creative decisions that fractured the audience further. Legitimate criticism was often dismissed as bad faith. Fans who didn't respond to the new direction were treated as obstacles rather than stakeholders. The result was predictable: declining enthusiasm, muted excitement for new projects, and a brand that struggled to generate momentum even when new content arrived. Star Wars didn't just lose fans, it lost cultural gravity, a leadership that signals internal alarm. Kennedy will be replaced by dual leadership structure, pairing Dave Filoni as president and chief creative content or chief officer, along with Lin-Wen Brennan, who will oversee the business side of the studio. The pairing itself is telling. Disney clearly felt the need to install a financial counterweight after years of runaway budgets, missed targets, and expensive underperformers. Brennan's background in operations and balance sheets is not a coincidence. That's a good point. For sure, because Kennedy has done such a bad job of keeping up with the budgets and the production side. So that's actually a good point that they needed to put someone in there that can handle this. However, from what I understand, she's much in the same line with Kennedy in terms of the identity politics and all that garbage. Filoni's track record raises serious questions. While Filoni has long been viewed as a guardian of Star Wars lore, his recent record offers little reason. As a central creative force behind multiple Disney Plus series, Filoni oversaw projects that failed to unite the fan base, including The Acolyte, which was canceled after one season, and Ahsoka, a show that leaned heavily on niche familiarity, barely said that word, while struggling to connect with audiences. Rather than course correcting, that's exactly right. Rather than course correcting, they basically just did more of the same. So this was Dave Filoni at the head of creative, which is the same job that he's going to be doing now. He's just not going to have one more person ahead of him, which isn't going to step in anyway. Dave Filoni was at the forefront of The Acolyte. That's all you need to know. No other argument matters. It doesn't matter how much you liked what he did with things. And I've said it before, I think he gets too much credit for the Clone Wars. And I think he gets too much hate because it was George Lucas's baby. And Filoni gets way too much credit in both directions for that. George Lucas was integral in the Clone Wars. And Dave Filoni gets way too much praise and way too much hate for that. Dave Filoni is Rebels. Dave Filoni is The Acolyte. That's Dave Filoni. Star Wars isn't fixed. It's just handed off. Kennedy's departure will be celebrated by many fans who have spent years waiting for accountability at the top of Lucasfilm. But leadership changes alone don't solve structural problems. The franchise still faces a fractured audience, diminished theatrical relevance, escalating production costs, creative leadership that is deeply tied to the same era fans rejected. In other words, Star Wars is not being rebuilt, it's being rearranged. This is very well written by Marvin over on geeksandgamers.com. Big shout out to him for putting this together. And ultimately, my thoughts on this are it's not going to be any different under Dave Filoni and Lin-Wen Brennan. It's more of the same. Kennedy will be celebrated. She will be treated like a Hollywood legend, and they will sail her off into the sunset, but she's still probably going to be involved, more involved than they allowed George Lucas to be after he sold it. So I think that anybody that's putting any type of excitement behind this is going to be very misguided. Look at Dave Filoni's track record in the last, several years, and that washes away any goodwill that he may have earned in people's eyes, even though I feel that that goodwill was earned under false pretenses of something he was not as responsible for as people like to give him credit, which was the Clone Wars. Anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you excited as Star Wars saved everyone? I don't think so, but let me know. Have a great day, and we will talk to you later.